Listen Layer enables everyday marketers to send really powerful custom data into a tool like Google Analytics 4. Today, we're going to talk specifically about how you can send custom events with parameters into GA4 and how you can use Listen Layer to get that data and make that data more meaningful. Now, we're going to focus on HubSpot forms, which is a common system that a lot of people use to manage their forms. However, all of these scenarios can apply to many other listeners. If you're brand new to Listen Layer, jump into our listener library and turn on the listeners that apply to your situation and your website. And also, if you're new, make sure that you've defined your domain name and that you've placed your website tracking script across all your pages using Google Tag Manager. Then publish those changes. So let's dive in. Now, inside of HubSpot Forms, we have a number of features. These activity features are the ones that push specific information into the data layer automatically. And what you'll see here, for example, is that when form submissions occur, there's an event called HS Form Submitted that's pushed into the data layer. And with that, there are these elements called automatic values. So I know this can look a little bit scary if you're not familiar with code, but it's quite a simple structure, and we will drill into this to look at it more closely. Because as you start to implement Google Analytics 4 and realize the power of custom events and parameters, you'll want to understand how you can use this to really enhance your Google Analytics experience. Now, it's also important to note that there's this event settings screen, which shows you all of the events that this listener is capable of pushing into the data layer based on activity on your website. And we have two of these enabled. Those correspond to the features that we have enabled that are listed under these activity filters. Now, it's also important to note that we have the custom data layer values feature turned on. There's other use cases, instructions, and actually a video right here where you can learn more about these specific features and how to implement them. Today, because we're focused on custom events and parameters in GA4, I'm not going to get into the full details of how you implement these, but you're going to see a little bit of a preview so you can understand the power of those. So let's take a look at a live data layer on our demo website. So you can see this data layer event is called HS Form Submitted. And that means that on our demo website, somebody just submitted a form and the listener identified that and it grabbed that information, it pushed it into the data layer. And this event is unique. It'll never change. That name of that is, it is what it is. And we can target that inside of Google Tag Manager to trigger activities in Google Tag Manager, such as firing a Google Analytics 4 event. So in this case, we're going to talk about, hey, what if I want to fire a Google Analytics 4 event every time a form is submitted, but I want to send an additional piece of information in on that. And that's where parameters come in GA4. Now, the data layer is structured, the data layer specifically from Listen Layer is structured with two major sections. And there are some other sections as well, but there's the section here called Form Automatic Values. This will automatically collect data from the form or from the chat tool or whatever application or scenario that you're working with. It'll automatically collect as much information as it can, structure that information, and push it into the data layer so that you can reference it and do something with it. And you'll see there's a lot of code, and that's because what it's done is it's grabbed every aspect of that form, organized it nicely, and pushed it into the data layer. Now, the other major section is this custom values. The one above was automatic values. These are custom values. So these are values that we define inside of Listen Layer. And this is where Listen Layer can get extremely powerful. We can write rules that will push custom values into a custom variable that we create. And those values, those rules are based on conditions that typically are going to look at other values inside of the data layer. And so you can use this to start to segment your data and enhance your data. And specifically with GA4, this becomes extremely powerful when you start talking about parameters or even features like user properties in GA4. Now, there are some other sections inside of the data layer, such as location. Almost all of our listeners are going to push in the specific location of the actual event, so you can just grab it in real time. And for debugging and kind of support purposes, you'll be able to see your specific listen layer account deployment and information right here. So I'm going to jump into listen layer and just show you how this information is pushed into the data layer. Remember, we turned on this feature called custom data layer values, where it was already turned on. And once that's enabled, we have a new menu item here called custom values, which is where we can create rules that push information into our data layer. Now, before we do that, we have to make sure that we have the variables actually built or created at the global level. So today we're going to be focused on this variable called form quality. And we have another use case that focuses specifically on how to build this rule. So you can search for that, maybe search for tracking form quality inside of the use cases on the listenlayer.com website. But inside the rule itself, we have what's called a lookup table rule, which reads from top to bottom, and it'll match these conditions on the left. And once they're matched, it'll return these values inside of the data layer. And so what you can see we're doing here is if a user's email address that's entered into the form has the word test in it, we're going to just go ahead and label that as a test submission. If it has the word Gmail or Yahoo, maybe some common personal emails, we're going to call it a low quality submission. And then everything else, this is a regular expression that kind of matches all other values, are just going to be called normal. So the idea is, let's send an event into Google Analytics 4 when a form is submitted. But why stop there? When we have Listen Layer, and Listen Layer allows us to do so many cool things, why wouldn't we start to push in some parameters, some characteristics of the event that help us to further define it, segment our data inside of Google Analytics, and improve the insights that we can gain from that? And this is why it's extremely important to have a data framework. You can jump into Listen Layer and start building and start learning, but eventually it's best to take a step back and make sure that you build out a data framework that can scale and that kind of works across the board for what you're trying to accomplish. So all of this has already been saved and deployed, and we're going to focus on actually sending the event into Google Analytics 4. And so what you can see here is we have this value called form quality. And so in Google Tag Manager, we need this value to be accessible. So we have actually already created this. What we did is we created a variable called form quality. And I'll just go ahead and click into this so you can see the settings. We created the variable, and the first thing we did was we selected that we want this to be a data layer variable because that's where we're getting the information from. And then the name of the variable is actually the path to get to that. And so how you grab the path is, well, there's a few different ways. Because this is a custom variable, the easiest thing to do is either to just simply read it and say, okay, I know it's under form custom values, so it's going to be form custom values dot form quality. Then you can just double check, is form custom values nested inside of anything else? And it's not. It's nested inside of form automatic values, actually. The other easier way to do this is to actually just look inside of the data layer, find our HS form submitted, find the actual variable itself, right click on it, and notice I'm in the console, click property path, copy property path, and that's going to be the value that we need inside of here. So you can just paste that in here. And actually, I guess it's not it's not inside of form automatic values. I misspoke there when I was looking at the data layer. So now this value is available inside of Google Tag Manager. Now it's also important to note we have a trigger that we've already pre-created called HS form submitted. So on all of our HubSpot form submission activity we want to trigger to occur. What you can see here is we're actually triggering a Google Ads tag every single time a HubSpot form is submitted. Now, going back to Listen Layer, that event is this event right here. It's the event that's pushed into the data layer when a HubSpot form is submitted. You can see here the event name again. So we've created a trigger that will fire every single time that event appears in our data layer. And now we've just created a variable that will actually grab the value from our custom rules for this form quality right here. So now it's time to create our Google Analytics 4 event. So we're going to go into new and we're going to grab our GA4 event. And we already have our ID, our measurement ID configured here. So I'm just going to grab that. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this. That's the name of the event. But we want to send in a parameter. And what we want to call that is probably something along the lines of quality. We're actually going to push in the form quality variable that we just created. So I realize this can be a little bit too fully kind of take in. So I'll go back through this again in a second once I kind of drive home this point that we're going to send this event in every single time a HubSpot form is submitted. So no matter what, when a HubSpot form is submitted, we're going to send this event to Google Analytics. We're going to call this event form submission. And when that happens, we're actually going to push a value into the parameter field called form quality. And that value is going to come from the data layer. It's going to be this value right here. And we're going to call this our GA4 form event. And we're going to save this. And then we're going to go ahead and preview. We're going to just refresh our preview. Make sure that nothing else has changed in our workspace. And then we are going to take a second to pull up Google Analytics itself. Okay, so here I'm going to bring up Google Analytics 4. And I'm actually looking directly at the debug view. And what we can do now is we can just navigate back to our HubSpot form and go ahead and fill out that form again. We'll get the event again, HS form submitted. I'm going to jump back to my debug view and I'm going to make sure that my GA4 event fired on this actual, or my GA4 tag fired on this event. And if I look at the values, you can see we have this event name called form submission, and we have form quality, which equals normal quality submission. What we should actually see here is in our debug view, inside of Google Analytics, because we're open in the same session here, we can see this form submission actually appearing in our stream of debug activity. And if I expand form quality, I can see that the value of normal quality submission is appearing here. So this is really cool that we can see this in real time and we can confirm that, you know, Listen Layer is allowing us to customize our data layer, which is then allowing us to trigger this tag and send custom values into Google Analytics. You can do so many powerful things with this once you start to understand parameters. Now in GA4, you do have to wait a while for the data to actually settle. So you'd have to check back in 24 hours or so. And what you'll see is that that event should start to appear, you know, those custom events will start to appear here in this event screen. And then you can do a bunch of different things with them. You can create additional events based on the events and the parameter values. You can turn those into conversions. But you do have to wait a little bit for the data to settle. So it's important to get familiar with using this debug view and to just double check and make sure that your events are being appropriately sent into Google Analytics 4. Listen Layer is free to get started and free to use forever. You only have to pay for the features that you need if you want to upgrade to some premium features or if you need more volume. So we encourage you to jump in and start using the tool and see what you can do with Listen Layer and Google Analytics 4.